No one had expected Star Wars to be such a hit except for a handful of people who were making it, and even they were skeptical. The studio nearly shut it down several times and barely promoted it. Lucas sent one of his classmates, Charlie Lippincott, to a new convention in San Diego called Comic-Con to show concept art for the movie and an upcoming comic book, which would be published by Stan Lee. He also had a novelization written, but none of it was backed up by the studio. They released it to theaters the week before Memorial Day weekend, and fewer than 40 theaters agreed to take it. But in the first weekend, all but one of the theaters which released it broke their box office records. Fox finally realized what they had, so they paired it with a movie theaters did want, a film called The Other Side of Midnight, and said the theaters would have to take this obscure sci-fi film if they wanted this romantic drama. Theaters gave in, and what resulted was the exact opposite from what was expected. Star Wars went on to make $265 million, while The Other Side of Midnight did not even top $25 million. Because the success was so unexpected, no one was ready with merchandise to sell.
Merchandising!
Lippincott had tried to get game and toy companies interested, but the only one that bit was Kenner, a small toy company looking to expand. They took the license not because they thought the movie would do well, but because they wanted a line of science fiction toys. Their action figures wouldn't even come out until nearly a year after the movie released. When they realized how in demand they were, they sold an empty box with the pictures of the figures and a promise that they would be shipped in a couple of months. Basically pre-sales, the kids version. Dolls, games, shirts, trading cards, masks, Pez dispensers.
You're not really famous until you're a Pez dispenser.
Were all created with Star Wars images. The action figures became an important part of my life. My best friend and I collected them as fast as they came out, and we created ongoing stories with them. We combined them with the adventure people from Fisher-Price, setting up whole towns and putting them through all new adventures. The story we created with our first two figures in 1978 continued on unbroken for years. Each time we bought new figures, they became new characters in the ongoing, growing, epic story. We were so involved in our own story that we were more excited about what was going to happen next in that than we were in the upcoming sequel. The best part of it was that there would be new figures. The first one that was announced was Boba Fett. He would initially only be available for purchase by collecting enough proof of purchase tokens off of the boxes of figures you had already bought. They were part of the cardboard, and you had to cut them out. My friend Ryan collected enough to buy it before the movie came out. None of us knew yet what part this character in strange-looking armor would play, but it inspired our imaginations to think of what it could be. And that's what the toys were doing more than anything. They inspired our imaginations on what could be more than what was. George Lucas originally wanted to make independent experimental films, preferably some with political messaging. You can see that vision in his early work, especially while he was still in college. He and Francis Ford Coppola had tried to build their own studio away from Hollywood, which would foster this sort of independent film vision. They had a team of filmmakers who had the same vision with them in San Francisco under the name Zoetrope, which they formed in 1969. They expected to release a slew of indie movies throughout the 1970s, and to become the face of a new generation of visual storytellers. They were, however, still tied to Hollywood through the funding they were getting from Warner Brothers. That was also where they got their distribution and advertising. What they needed was a hit that would bring them enough money to fund, or at least partly fund, their other low-budget projects. That project would be Lucas's THX 1138. Everything was riding on that film. Warner Brothers did not understand it, and they tried to save it by re-editing the piece. It was a flop. Lucas blamed Warner Brothers for changing it, but it could have simply been too cerebral and slow for audiences. In any case, it destroyed the hopes and dreams of Zoetrope. Everyone went their separate ways. Coppola took a job he had been avoiding, directing a mob movie called The Godfather. Lucas tried a couple things that were a little more commercial, American Graffiti and Star Wars. When Star Wars was a hit, he finally had what he needed to create his own production company. He could set himself free of the studio system. He moved back up to San Francisco and he built Lucasfilm. Here he would expand into the independent film empire of Central California he had hoped to create with Francis. They would make a slew of independent films with new voices. But first he would follow up the success of his hit film with its sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. He would finance it himself so no one would be able to claim ownership of it, and no one would be able to tear it away from him or change it. Having all of these new responsibilities as the president of a company and as producer distracted George from his original jobs as writing and directing. He instead did what he really does best. He created the outline, the vision, and all the ideas, and he passed the specific work on to others to do. There was actually another factor at play in all this as well, which made it difficult for George to focus on the stresses of writing and directing: his divorce. Though he and Marcia had made a great team up until this point, she had expected them to slow down enough to start a family. George was using his success to speed up. He would now be more busy than he had ever been. While little has ever been revealed about the various feelings at this time, it had to be one of the most stressful periods of his life. We all saw him as triumphant while he was experiencing heartbreak. Lucas passed the screenwriting duties to longtime science fiction writer Lee Brackett. Her first draft resembled a silhouette of what the movie would eventually become. Beginning on a snow planet, Luke goes to train, and everyone winds up on a city floating above the clouds. But it diverted in many ways, including the fact that there were no bounty hunters, and Han instead went off to work with his powerful stepfather. Lando was a clone from the Clone Wars, the Wampa attacked the Rebel base, and Vader was not Luke's father. Spoilers, by the way. No! Instead, Anakin's ghost trained Luke along with Yoda and Obi-Wan, and Luke went off to get vengeance for his pa. Lee had followed Lucas's notes, but he wasn't happy with it yet. Unfortunately, though, before he could work with her on a second draft, she died of cancer, which she had not told him she had. Lucas tried to write it himself, coming up with a couple more drafts before passing it on to Lawrence Kasdan, whom he already had working on Raiders of the Lost Ark. He then passed on the directing duties to one of his former professors, Irvin Kershner. Kershner seemed counterintuitive for a film like this. He was known for his more personal, character-driven films. But that was exactly what Lucas wanted for this second installment. It was part of his experimental nature. Though he was making the sequel to the largest mainstream film of all time, he wanted to take different directions than expected. And it was not just undermining people's expectations. This was the part of the series which would slow down enough to get to know the characters, and to feel what they're feeling throughout the darkest portion of the story. What better person to direct than the man who brought us this?
And I've seen all kinds of murder, physically, yes, but moral, spiritual, emotional murder. I can't stop it. I can show it. I can make people look at it.
That's a very moral point of view.
Then, after another infamously difficult production, often for the opposite reasons of the first film, we all got to see it. As it begins, we learn that it's a dark time for the rebellion, which is a little shocking after the last film left us with a celebration ceremony. And we pan down to see what we see at the beginning of all three films, a Star Destroyer. Last time something went into its belly, this time something comes out of it.
Why is it that everything today has involved things either going in or coming out of my ass?
The probe droids fly out to search for the rebels, which is a great way to transition to them without being jarring. That's one thing I have to admit that Empire has over Rogue One. That, and that the first act is once again 40 minutes. In fact, in presenting the first act, they use a model often seen in James Bond films. To make the film accessible to new viewers, those three people who didn't see the first Star Wars film, they create a short adventure which reintroduces the characters while expanding the universe and forwarding the overall story a little bit. At the same time, we get elements of what will carry us through the rest of this movie, such as Obi-Wan telling Luke to go to Dagobah, and the tension between Han and Leia. There is one element I'm less crazy about though, and I think it's a missed opportunity. Han has been given a leadership position, and put in command of troops. Leia says that he's a natural leader, but we've never seen that, and we don't see that at any time in this film. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want him to be. He's far more interesting just being, well, solo. Although there was potential for an interesting element by making him a commander. In the first film, yes, he came back to save Luke, but that was after abandoning everyone for the whole battle. Can you imagine being the friend of one of those pilots who was killed and knowing that there was a guy out there who could have had their backs, but he stayed out until his own friend was in trouble? That would cause some bitterness. I think that could have been an interesting subplot at the beginning. A lot of the rebels don't trust him, and they give him sidelong glances. That would give him all the more reason to want to leave, which would make his interactions with Leia even more interesting. She, meanwhile, is perhaps written at her best in these early scenes. We see her brashness and toughness played out as a leader. She's introduced in the command center, ostensibly supervising, which is the best place for her character. I only wish there was more about her commanding. She chases Han down primarily to convince him to stay for the rebellion, but there is subtext in that she's trying a bit harder than she would for others, and he calls her out on it. Han acts a bit childish, but we get the introduction to what will become their romance story. I think their best interaction is this pair of lines.
Scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Who's scruffy looking?
It's a wonderful way to reveal what's important to him, for her to hurl a few insults at him, and he takes offense to one of them. In so doing, he reveals what's important to him, looking good. Now I know a lot of people want to talk about the kiss, but if one is to remove the prequels, we don't know about the sibling crap yet. This creates the tension of a love triangle, which is where it should have stayed. I'm going to get more into that later, but for now... the best musical interpretation of power ever. The Imperial March is the embodiment of power. I think any dictator who wants to assert dominance would want his troops goose-stepping to this. It's firm, it's relentless, it exudes raw power, and it's scary as hell. And notice how they use it. We first hear it when we're introduced to the Imperial fleet, then return to it every time we come back to the Imperials as they build up for their attack on Hoth. During that first introduction, it plays during a visualization of scales. We first see some regular Star Destroyers, and in case we've forgotten how big they are, one of them flies right over our heads. It's not as long as the first movie, we don't need that much of a reminder, it's just the top section. Then we see fighters, and how tiny they are compared to them. And as we see that, a shadow blankets over the Star Destroyer. Something is even bigger. We then go underneath the Star Destroyer to see what could be overshadowing it. And it's a ship which is so huge, the Star Destroyer is to it what the blockade runner was to the Star Destroyer in A New Hope. Vader is introduced from behind. We don't need his face yet, we know who he is. And we see the Star Destroyer out the window, making him one and the same with the Empire. We continue to see just parts of him until he determines where the rebels are, and we see his shiny new helmet and black eyes. Veers got a real close-up of them when Vader turned to him.
General Veers, prepare your men.
But like Vader didn't know he was so close. That always cracks me up, like, General Veers! Oh, you're right there. Personally, I'd be freaking out if I was Veers. When they get to Hoth, Vader complains that they came out of lightspeed too close to the system. I find this to be a flaw in the writing because, well, where the hell else are they going to come out of lightspeed? If they came out further, they'd have to slowly make their way to the planet, giving the rebels way more time to escape. As we cut to the rebels, Leia provides the information we need to understand what's supposed to happen. It shows a couple things at once. Her character as the leader she is supposed to be, along with her leadership style, and establishes to us, the audience, what is going to be happening if things go according to plan. This is helpful because we now have a baseline for what is expected, and know when things have gone wrong. Outside, they're doing the same thing, but with actions instead of words. You visually see the soldiers setting up. We see the weapons they're using, their lines, their trenches, and the fact that they keep looking nervously out into the distance reveals their fear. The tension mounts. The one line they give is the commander.
Their primary target will be the power generators.
So again, we know the stakes. Even though Lucas was not directing this one, he showed Kirshner what he envisioned for this moment. It was based off an old Eisenstein movie, Alexander Nevsky, where the characters look into the vast distance, then see a huge army coming. It's relentless. They know they cannot stop it, but they must fight nonetheless. And so the rebels take their positions along the trench. You notice that this entire time we see the rebels on the left side of the screen looking to the right. This is an important tool in filmmaking. You establish one group looking one way, and the other group looking the other way. Even when someone looks close to the screen, they should still be looking slightly in the direction established for that faction. The AT-ATs will always be seen going right to left. The one exception to this is when we follow the airspeeders. Their flying around and making turns mixes things up a bit, but it always comes back to the rebels looking right, Imperials looking left. By the way, this battle is more technically difficult than the one in New Hope. First, it mixes various styles of effects, including live action, stop motion, pyrotechnics, and optical effects. While in the first film, the only motion of a vehicle was the S-foils opening on the X-wings, and now you see every gear moving on the AT-ATs. You also see the small flaps turn on the airspeeders, and most difficult of all was the combining of images. In the original, ships mostly flew against black backgrounds, which is easy to do. The most challenging part is a small line you might see around the ships, but that's black so it disappears. But against a planetary background, a white planetary background no less, that makes it extremely difficult. But Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic had determined to do something more impressive this time, and they were doing it. Although I do always chuckle at this part. My guy, you just missed both walkers. how do you almost completely whiff something like that? As Luke calls to Rogue 3, it's another great example of how well this series works with the movie Rogue One, a development of their story as their sacrifice has led to a squadron named in their honor. And who's in it but Wedge, who is Luke's wingman in New Hope. And his story has subtly continued, as he has gone up the ranks. But notice he's not yet a leader. He's Rogue 3, not Rogue Leader. There's still room for him to develop. Although Luke calls him Rogue 2 the second time he talks to him. So I guess he's promoted very quickly.
Rogue 3! Copy, Rogue Leader. Steady, Rogue 2.
When I was a kid, I used to say Wedge was my favorite character. It wasn't really because of the character itself, but because of what he represented. The idea that there are these other characters outside the main story, and his rise from low-rank pilot to Rogue 3 to Rogue Leader eludes that. Plus the actor is Obi-Wan's uncle, which is pretty badass, and brings the whole thing full circle, and creates a time loop. Despite the airspeeders, the walkers continue their relentless march forward, which is a simple way of presenting a battle where there's no hope. Every time we come back to them, they're just still marching forward. All the rebels can do is slow them down a little. Except not these guys. As our characters leave, they split up, creating a story structure which can be used to very good effect in a sequel. Lord of the Rings is a great example. The characters form up and go on their quest together in the first story. Then they're separated for the second story by circumstance, only to come back together at the end to fight the villain together. Well, most of them come together. Even though we get less time with each character, we actually get to know them individually a little more. By separating them from some characters, then matching them with others, we learn more about who they are and how they react to new challenges. It's an effective way to develop personalities while also avoiding the trap of doing the same thing each time. It also forces the writer into exploring more of the universe as each group of characters go out into different corners of it. Since the characters split up here, rather than jumping back and forth between them, I'm going to talk about each storyline separately. Early in this sequence, we finally get to see those few maneuvers Han was referring to in the first film. And it's almost like ILM was showing off. They don't just make it more maneuverable, they have all the ships doing all sorts of tricks. Just the spin alone is extremely tricky, as they weren't able to do a full 360 while making the original. So much of what we take for granted today was mind-blowing at the time. By the way, imagine if they had gone with the Falcon being what it was originally supposed to be, the ship that became the blockade runner. Wouldn't have been the same. And the only reason it got changed was because Lucas didn't want Han's ship to look like the one from Space 1999. And then they add asteroids. It's like they're saying, "You like that? Hold my beer." Now they're not just twisting and turning, they're tumbling in chaotic fashions. The motion control cameras were on overdrive. They were all shot separately, sometimes weeks and months apart, and none of them could collide, unless they were scripted to. By the way, many of the asteroids in the background were potatoes. Samwise would be proud. The music, too, was coordinated with their movements. There's the build-up, then... even details like that perfectly timed drum roll as they just miss the asteroid play with the visuals and the sound effect. As they land the ship inside one of the asteroids, they have the time to deal with each other while they try to repair the ship. This is where the romance between Han and Leia begins to blossom. And I have to admit, I've always had some problems with this. It's not that they shouldn't get together. I think that was a good idea. The original hints at something starting between Luke and Leia. Again, get the whole twins crap out of your minds. That didn't exist yet. Usually in these movies, the princess wound up with the main hero. So for her to be turning instead to the smuggler was original for the time, and pretty clever. It's also well set up that these two would be good for each other. They have a kinetic chemistry which works much like old comedies. And it works that she has a hard exterior he breaks through. However, it's overdone to the point of being a tad bit problematic. The first scene works because she follows him, and though she's not showing any blatant attraction, the act of following shows some interest, and it's implied that they've had some emotional history between the two movies. But as it goes along, he keeps being so pushy to the point of cringe. He takes no to mean keep trying. Try going up behind a woman and just putting your body around her like this today and see how much she likes it. That being said, I know what they were going after. I just get annoyed when it's called one of the greatest romances of all time, and I think it could have been made a little more mutual with a few tweaks. Perhaps make him a little less forceful, and or her just a little more interested. So the same thing could be accomplished without aging a little cringeworthy. Interestingly, Carrie Fisher herself spoke a little about this in her final autobiography, which I recommend listening to as she narrates it herself. Anyway, while they're parked, they commit what many consider the biggest faux pas of the film. They go outside of the ship, into the vacuum of space, wearing only breathing masks. Some people use it as an example of how unrealistic Star Wars has always been, so it shouldn't be a problem to do other unrealistic things. Others have tried to make up reasons why spacesuits aren't necessary. I tend to point at another scene which I consider a bigger problem, where they look at other systems, deciding which one to go to, and choose Bespin, all while their hyperdrive isn't working. Within the logic of their own story, getting to any of these systems shouldn't be possible. Ultimately, we should simply admit that these are genuine mistakes, and movies are made by humans capable of fuck-ups. Don't find lame excuses for them, but also don't use them as excuses for other movies. In fact, as Kenobi said,
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows it?
As storytellers today, we should learn from these mistakes and avoid them ourselves. The fool who follows is always more foolish, because that is someone who could choose to learn and improve, but decides not to. One of the smartest choices they made with the Empire in this film was focusing on Vader when they cut to them. Though I loved the complexities of the Imperial characters in Andor, this is a story of Vader's obsession, and there's only enough time to tell it. And you need a little more time with him because he's not opening up about his real motivations, what he's really after, and what he's really feeling. And the more something is hidden, the more time you need to reveal what it really is. One of the moments which shows something more is going on is when the officer walks in on him. At the time Star Wars was first releasing, audiences were speculating as to whether Vader was a robot or a person. This showed he was a person, but it went a step further, revealing something massively odd about his head. Was that his brain? Was he not human? With Rogue One attached, we've already seen a bit more, but we still don't know exactly what he is. This is a good way to slowly reveal something. It's what I wish they had done in The Mandallorian, leaving the character's face hidden until the very end. It's a problem you have when there's a more famous actor who wants face time. Part of the reason why Lucas went for nearly all unknowns. As he moves around, we get clues about what he's thinking and feeling through his motions. Not emotions, but his body language. The way he turns his head, the speed at which he moves, the pauses of his speech. It's a fascinating study of expressing oneself through everything except the face. He also kills off his officers on a whim. It's part of his cruelty, and it's a little funny, but it primarily expresses what he said in the first film about Imperial weapons being insignificant next to the power of the Force. To him, the Empire is disposable, along with everyone in it. Only the Force matters. By the way, here's one officer he didn't kill, but I've always thought it's a nice touch. The establishing shot shows an asteroid hitting the Star Destroyer. Then you see one of the officers in the hologram looking away in terror and disappearing. And it doesn't faze Vader at all. Speaking of the Force, though, when he goes to speak with the Emperor, I have another moment when I long for the original movies to be re-released. One might say the special edition is better because you can see the Emperor so much clearer. But that's the problem. Originally you could barely see him. He was dim, mostly behind a cloak, and fuzzy. But most of all, he was still a mystery. In the original trilogy, he wasn't seen at all in the first movie. We see little more than a shadow of him in the second, and in the third, we still only see a little of him until he turns and shows his face. This makes it much more powerful. Add Andor and Rogue One, and it's even more intense, having heard about him throughout Andor, then learning about the Emperor's Death Star program in Rogue One. It's all so well built up. Showing his big face here breaks that. Although one thing they retained that was great was making the Emperor's hologram so big, larger than Vader, probably even if he stood. When the bounty hunters come in, they bring with them another expansion to the universe. Characters who neither fight for the Empire nor the Rebellion. The armor and weapons are all individualized. Boba Fett looked perhaps the coolest. And I think what a lot of people liked about him was the same thing they liked about Han Solo. He's unique, and has his own style. The idea that no one else was quite like him was part of what made him interesting. It's why I've always been a bit dubious about Filoni's creation of the Mandalorians, at least their armor. I like the culture he created. I think their addition into the Clone Wars and the zeitgeist of Star Wars is a welcome one. But I strongly wish he had made their armor different. Making it the same as Boba Fett's did not add to his character, and only served to undermine his uniqueness. The first time I saw the film in 1980, when Yoda showed up, the audience, I included, laughed really hard. It wasn't meant as disrespect, it's just that it was Grover.
It is I, your old pal, Super Grover!
Looking? Found someone you have, I would say, hmm?
I am talking to you all about the letter F.
Help you I can. Yes.
Frank Oz was the premier puppeteer, aside from Jim Henson, and he played Grover on Sesame Street. He also played roles like Miss Piggy, Fozzie, and Sam. He had not consciously chosen Grover's voice for Yoda, it just sounded wise to him. It also sounded goofy, which fit perfectly with the misdirect they were doing with his initial appearance. People make a lot about Vader's big surprise, but Yoda's reveal is just as big a deal. It had seemed like he would fall into the trope of comic relief. This was especially common at the time, the trusty, funny little friend who helps the hero. But then his whole demeanor changed, and the reveal is a major shock. That's all destroyed if you watch the prequels first. Frankly, the prequels should come after The Empire Strikes Back. Structurally, this works perfectly. We've had this slow build-up learning about the Jedi, and the light and dark sides of the Force. We've learned about the characters, now we need to know who they were, and how everything got to this place. Then, once we have that context, the story could go on to the finale. And then there's a bit of another surprise. We've been given the impression that Jedi are great warriors, and their glowing swords are powerful weapons, so one would conclude that Yoda will teach Luke how to fight. But instead, he gets him in shape, teaches him discipline, and muses on philosophy. The only power he teaches him is telekinesis while standing on his head. They never pull out a lightsaber. I do wonder about the wisdom of teaching him while doing a handstand, though. It's a little like when you learn karate, but you only know how to use it in very specific situations. Wait, Vader, time out! Give me a moment to do a handstand. This is where they absolutely killed it with the amazing dialogue, though. Phrases which have held great meaning throughout the decades.
Force not make one great.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you. Try not. Do. Or do not. Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? Always in motion is the future.
I don't believe it.
That is why you fail.
As the Falcon nears Cloud City, we not only arrive at a new environment, we enter a whole new color palette. One thing Lucas knew he wanted from the beginning was a series of very different environments, all of which would be distinct from one another at a glance. This not only provides a nice variety, it also emphasizes the concept of being in different parts of the galaxy. Bespin in particular is intended to be beautiful, with hues of light reds, oranges, and pinks, like the colors of a sunset. It also gives us more of a sense of a civilian location, but unlike Mos Eisley, we see it a little more from the government perspective through Lando. Then, of course, it turns out to be a betrayal, which is all the more surreal because of the beautiful environment. It also happens so suddenly that it's natural to think for a moment that it's not real, especially since the appearance of Vader on Dagobah was a vision. And Han not hesitating, just immediately taking the shot, shooting first, perfectly in character. Although I have to wonder what the meal was like once they entered. I imagine it was awkward with Vader and Boba not able to eat anything, and no one else really wanting to eat. That chef must have been pissed! Of all the settings throughout this film, the carbon freezing chamber was the best. Everything from the placement to the lighting to the steam. It's easy to overlook a set, it's supposed to blend into the background. But most of the blocking of the carbon freeze scene and the lightsaber duel are made possible because of this perfect set. And it's here that I think Empire gets its true reputation for being dark. Up to this point, everyone has had close calls and been overwhelmed, but only now are the heroes truly trapped. There is nothing they can do. Even when the strongest among them, the Wookiee, tries to fight his way out, he's overcome. For once in this sort of sci-fi adventure, the situation is truly hopeless. They must instead say their goodbyes. Han and Leia kiss, then he's put into position. She has one last chance to say how she feels, so she does.
I love you.
I know.
Han's response is legendary. Funny enough, that wasn't how it was written. He was supposed to say I love you back, but it just wasn't sounding right. So Irvin Kershner told Harrison to say whatever felt right. This is what felt right. It's the power of improv. Sometimes the actor has been in the character's shoes so long, he knows what's needed. Incidentally, Lucas hated the I know line.
George, I think that this is fair enough to say he went ape shit. He thought it was horrible and that it would get a bad laugh. So I was obliged to sit next to him when he tested it for the first screening. There was a laugh, but it was a laugh of recognition.
All that being said, you fellas out there who say this to your girlfriends thinking it's romantic, stop it. You sound like damn fools. It worked here because throughout the story, Leia's been denying her feelings for Han and couldn't admit them. So when she finally says it, he's responding that he's known her heart all along. Quite frankly, he should say I know, then I love you too, but in drama, you want to say as much as you can around what you mean, and stay true to that character. And yeah, this is a very Han Solo thing to say. But when you say it outside of that context, you're just being a douche. Cut it out. Tell your girlfriend or wife you love her. And while you're at it, tell your mom that too. Okay, back on track. One little detail I like here when Luke goes to this corner is that Boba Fett looks over, but Luke doesn't see him looking over. It's subtle, but establishes why Boba is able to set up a trap for him. When Luke finally arrives and is locked into the room, the visuals are beyond words. There are times when shots are so perfectly framed and lit that there is no word beyond, "That's cinema." And the buildup of 2 movies to lead to this point has created a boiling point of expectations. And the director and editor give it time and allow the scene to breathe. Finally, Luke makes his fatal mistake. The very thing Yoda and Obi-Wan had warned him against. He draws first. It's aggression. It's vengeance. It's not the Jedi way. Vader answers by turning on his own lightsaber. And notice the differing speeds of their lengthening. Luke shoots right out. Vader's comes out very slowly. It doesn't make logical sense, but this is one of those moments when something is being said through the visuals that supersedes details. From this point on, this is not a duel. It is a conversation with sabers. After Han is flown away, notice this nice transition back to Luke and Vader. The motion conversation becomes verbal.
Learn much, young one.
You'll find I'm full of surprises.
Up to the point when Luke falls into the chamber, Vader has been using only one hand on his saber. When Luke comes out of it, proving how powerful he is, Vader is now using 2. An important element to the fight is the motion through multiple locations. As awesome as the first set is, a sword fight can only last so long before it becomes dull. Each one raises the stakes a little more. The last one, of course, gives us an almost literal cliffhanger, building the tension even higher, especially for those of us afraid of heights. And I recently learned that this window here is supposed to be the one Luke fell out of, which leaves me with a whole slew of questions. Anyway, Vader's fighting has gone from one-handed to two-handed to using all his might. And when he actually takes a hit, it's time to end the fight. Finally, the hand being cut off when Luke's back is to the void. There is nowhere left to go. It doesn't get any more suspenseful than this. How could things get any more intense? And then Vader gives his famous line.
I am your father's brother's
No, the
nephews.
other one.
I am your father.
Perfectly timed, perfectly framed, perfectly acted, with the emphasis on the I, and the Imperial music backs it up.
It's not true.
And I'm not super crazy about it. Don't get me wrong, it was a clever twist, and probably the perfect thing to do at that time with this sort of story. Villains like Vader had always been evil incarnate from beginning to end, and the goal was always to destroy them. But now he is that late father Luke has pined for. His desire to know more about him was well established from the beginning.
How did my father die?
This is a perfect situation since Vader's own face has not been seen. It even puts meaning behind cutting off the hand which was holding the father's old saber. So what possible problem could I have with it? Well, not because of what it does to Vader, but because of what it does to Luke. Up to this very moment, he has been a boy from a farm who saw evil in the galaxy and wanted to do something about it. When the opportunity arose, he was a little hesitant, but he chose to go. He chose to save Leia. He chose to join the rebellion. And he chose to fight in the Battle of Yavin. He then chose to stick with the rebellion, going on missions, leading troops, rising up the ranks. But with Vader being his father, it's really just all a matter of fate. He never really chose anything. He just followed his natural path. We can say all we want about having the choice to take our path or not, but it's still a path. Not someone who had another life and gave it up to do what was right. It's fine because it does create an interesting story which goes somewhere quite compelling, and it was an opportunity they really had to take advantage of. How many times do you have a villain who's in a suit that covers his face, and a protagonist who's pining for a missing father? It is kinda perfect. But it's also why Cassian Andor has become my favorite character, and why his series is really more inspiring. Those of us who don't have this chosen one fate laid out for us can look at that and be moved by someone who chose to do something, even if he had to take a bit of a detour to get there. Moving on, Luke makes his literal leap of faith, and I read the little smile he makes before he goes to be him realizing what Obi-Wan and Yoda had been telling him, to feel the Force around himself, to be at peace, and have faith in it. He does, and falls into a plot device. Tube. Apparently though, someone decided to watch TV, and the Force had no power there, so that's how HBO nearly doomed the galaxy. As Vader returns to the Star Destroyer, we have the dumbest special edition add-on of this movie. The action keeps getting interrupted just to watch this shuttle flying back. This is made all the more ridiculous by the fact that George Lucas was an editor. He should have known something about pacing. Even the music gets interrupted awkwardly. As Vader speaks with Luke through the Force, we get the only dissolves in the series. They're saved for this moment, to link the two, and it concludes with Luke saying,
Why didn't you tell me?
It's a sort of betrayal, and we're all going to have to wait 3 years to find out the answer. Personally, I just thought Vader was lying. After all, he did say,
He will join us or die.
And when they fly away, we get the best example of Vader's emotions shown through his body language. He's crushed. He even takes a second look to confirm they're really gone. So much is made about James Earl Jones' performance, and rightfully so, but David Prowse, who wore the suit, deserves enormous credit for his physical acting, especially in this film. Also, let's give a shout out to this officer, who takes a quick look over his shoulder to make sure Vader is really gone. Though audiences were surprised and occasionally taken aback by Empire's dark tone, it was extremely well received. It also broke box office records, and found people standing in long lines over and over again to watch. Ancillary sales were enormous, especially toys, which were ready with the release this time. Children, including myself and my friend, added the new toys to their collections and into our ongoing stories. Some used them to speculate on the conclusion of the series, which was a long ways away. Lucas shared many of the profits with his staff at Lucasfilm, and took the rest to build his studio, the one he and his friend Francis had envisioned. There would be facilities in San Francisco's Presidio and in Marin County, the latter of which he would call Skywalker Ranch. They would include sections for all departments of filmmaking, such as sound design, effects, and more. Skywalker Ranch in particular would be a workspace retreat for developing new projects, as well as classes and seminars to teach and inspire the next generation of filmmakers. It would be a place to build and inspire, an empire of imagination. This has been part 11 of a 12-part series covering the Star Wars. I hope you're enjoying it. If you agree with my opinions on storytelling, check out my books. The links are in the description. Relic Worlds is my series most like Star Wars, and I also have my own sort of Star Wars fan fiction in the form of an RPG series using the Age of Rebellion rulebook. Think of it like Critical Role in the Star Wars universe, but it's summaries of the story instead of us playing, with music and sound effects to support. The link to some of the playlists are in the description. Also, if you want to support my work directly here on YouTube, consider supporting me on Buy Me a Coffee. The link for that is also in the description. I'll be back next month with the conclusion to this year-long project. Thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.
Now, in honor of the letter F, I will do something that begins with the letter F. Yes?